Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. Today's topic is going to be about custom modules in Zoho CRM. My name is Stephen Bolden. I'll be taking over for Jeff for this week's session. And I know that last week he went over and talked a bit about what modules are in Zoho CRM terms. Zoho considers modules all of these things, which you see here at the left side of the screen: leads, contacts, accounts, deals, etc. These are all of your standard out-of-the-box modules that you get in Zoho CRM. And a quick recap of what Jeff covered last week. He showed that if you go into the CRM settings, which in this new CRM layout, the setup gear is in the bottom left corner here. Yours may be in a different spot, but if you go in the settings gear, there is a customization, modules, and fields section. Today, we're going to be customizing modules. Makes sense to go there. As we look at the modules available in CRM, again, you'll see all of our out-of-the-box default modules that Jeff went through last week, and that you have the ability to toggle these on and off. Not every module is going to be useful or relevant to every organization. Zoho can get a little overwhelming right out of the box because they throw so many different modules at you, and it can be a little hard to sort through them all. There are certain modules that I know Jeff turned off in the last week's call. For example, cases, price books, solutions. These are cool tools that do have a purpose, but like 90% of businesses, you just start small and you don't need them. They're more for things like support cases. Price books is for managing pricing and quoting that you might do out of CRM. Solutions is kind of like support ticketing that goes along with cases. We'll get there later. But what I want to talk about today is custom modules. What if you have a need for a module that doesn't fit neatly into some of these little tidy pre-made modules? Excuse me. Working through a small cold here as well. So you know that we have like leads and contacts, but we use custom modules all the time for when you might have a type of record that you need to associate that doesn't fit into one of these little boxes. For example, what if you were a property management company and you wanted a module to store your properties or locations or unit numbers? Where would you put those? Those aren't leads and contacts, and they're not accounts really, and they're certainly not like deals. That might be an instance where you'd make a custom module for properties. Or I have a customer that installs buried hidden wire dog fencing, and they have custom modules that track dogs and transmitters and warranties as a custom module that can then get associated to a certain record. I'll explain the wrong way that some people approach things like this, is let's say, for example, you had a module where you wanted a parent-child relationship. Perhaps you actually wanted to list children as a custom module and associate them back to other records. The wrong way that some people approach this is to start adding tons of fields to their module. They'll go to the contact and start adding on fields and call them child 1 name, child 1 birthday, child 1 gender, and then do it again for child 2 and child 3. And they end up with so many different fields. It's hard to sort, hard to search, and you also run into a problem. What happens if somebody has 4, 5, 6, 7 kids? Then you got to keep adding fields to all these different records. So those are the kinds of instances where you'd really want to make a custom module. And if we go into the Zoho settings, modules and fields, and do create new module, you can select which module type. I usually just do an organization module. Team modules will let you add it to a specific team space if you're trying to restrict who can use this one. For now, we're going to keep it broad. You can always change this type later. If you make it an organization module, you can still restrict who's going to have access to it. But we're going to make a new module, and immediately there's a few predefined fields. We're going to make this one from scratch. I'm going to go back to the properties example, for example, to talk about like addresses and perhaps a property management company. So your custom module, it starts off as untitled, and we're going to give this a name. So I'm going to click on the name in the corner, and it's going to have you type in the name twice, once as the pluralized version of this name and once as the singular version. So if I'm going to make the properties module that I'm talking about, I'll make the plural name will be properties. The singular name will be property. By giving Zoho both names, it's going to use the correct grammar in the correct situations. By default, your custom module can have an image field turned on, similar to how your contact image is. You can have contact images and company images. Your custom modules can have images as well. I actually will keep this one on. I think that in my example of a property, that makes sense, but you don't have to have an image field if it's not the type of thing that's relevant to your module. You can turn your image field on and off. And then we come to the most important field on the entire screen, and you're only going to have one chance to customize this. This is the module's primary field. You'll see every custom module and every module, even the standard system modules in Zoho, has a system field. It's a unique like primary key for that module. On contacts, that would be the last name field. You'll notice last name is mandatory. Last name cannot be changed, deleted, or removed from contacts. And that's the clickable ID for it. Same for leads, also uses, well, leads uses actually also the last name field. Accounts uses account name, deal uses deal name. It is the unchangeable, immutable primary record. As I'm thinking about my custom module, this is your one chance to change that primary record field. Every other field on the screen, you can come back and add new fields, change them, reorder them, rename them, make them mandatory, make them unique, or change their types later. But the one primary key field can only be done this once. When you're on the new module screen, you can go to the three dots and edit properties, the same as you'd normally change it. You're going to change your field label if you want. In this case, I'm actually just going to keep property name. I think that that's an appropriate name for this example module. But perhaps you want to call it something different. You have your chance to change the name here. And then you have two types of fields that you can use for your primary record. You can have a text field or an auto number. Auto numbers would be useful if you were going to make a custom module that might track warranty plans, for example, and you just want every new record that you create is just going to auto increment the next number in a system by 1. Then that would be a good example to use an auto number. An auto number lets you kind of specify that this field might start at something like warranty 0001 at excuse me, and we would just like increment them from there. You'll see my starting number is 1. It gives me a preview. Then every time I make one, it would just auto number increase. There's a lot of custom modules that you can think of that this might be relevant in how you want to do it. If you're tracking just certain type of record IDs that you might add on for a thing later. My example of properties, though, I'm actually going to keep it as a text field. I want this to be something that we'll fill out with a text name. You also have your option to say, do not allow duplicate values. That is, in some cases, based on your needs, important to have, if you're going to allow duplicates or not. I'm going to say yes. In my properties module, I'm going to have no duplicates. Okay, that was a big mouthful, but it was really just the most important part. The rest of this we can kind of fly through until we get to the lookup field. The other fields that Zoho adds on here by default, they've always got these fields for emails and an owner. In this case, we don't need an email. My properties module doesn't need an email address, and therefore I don't need a secondary email. I don't need the opt-out, so I'm just removing these. I'm going to remove this connected to multi-module lookup for right now. We're going to keep the fact that there's a property owner, a created by, and a modified by. These are Zoho mandatory fields. Every record in Zoho has to have an owner. It will always be one owner. It can't be 0, and it can't be multiple. It can't be a group-owned record. It's always a one-to-one. So there is always a property owner, a created by, and a modified by. But for now, I've got kind of a blank slate. What else am I going to want for a properties module? Well, certainly I'm probably going to want an address on there. So I'm going to add a new section in here. I'll call this address. And we'll call this address 1, address 2, city. I'm going to do a pick list. Where's my pick list? For state, we actually have a predefined list of U.S. states in there. And of course, then zip, which is going to go back to a thing. I don't need to go through too many more fields on here, but I could then maybe add some other sections for this fictional scenario that could be, you know, property management fields. Maybe I'm going to have something that could be like date of acquisition and something else. Those could go in here as well. For now, this is suitable enough. So I'm going to go ahead and save my module. I'm going to just put it in the top level CRM team space, give everybody permissions to this module, and it's saved. So sure enough, now if I go back into my home screen and look at my modules, it is right here under the properties section. I can reorganize and move this elsewhere. But I have a properties module now. I can now create a new property or import these. This will behave the same as any other examples. So if I'll have a property name, I'll call it 1600 Pennsylvania Ave. Or actually, I will just call this the White House as my property name and give it an address. Washington, D.C. It's probably a bad example because I don't know the state and address for Washington. Embarrassed myself a little bit here. And we acquired it here. We can add, this is now behaving the exact same as any other module in Zoho CRM. You can make custom views for it. You can have your filter by fields. We can change our columns. It will all start looking familiar. But now the real main thing is, what if I want to connect this back to another record? What if I want to assign which of my contacts is associated with this house or with this property? Well, this is an example where back in my setup under my modules and fields, if I go back into my settings and go back into my properties module here and edit my layout, this is when you are going to be using the lookup field. So there is a field type called lookup. And if I drag and drop the lookup field on here, it's going to ask, which module am I looking up? The lookup field in Zoho terms is like a relational field. This is for example, when you're making a new deal and it has a field for contact name, that's a lookup field where you're looking up which contact from another module is associated with this record, the deal module. In my case here, I have a custom module of properties. And so this is how I can select records from other modules in here. If I add contact, for example, and have this look up a contact, and then a related list title of how this will appear in the contact record, I'm going to call it properties. This is going to make a field where I will be able to select a contact to assign to this property. What it's asking when it says related list title is, when I'm viewing that contact record, what do we want to call these records that contact has been associated with? So here I'm going to choose contact and save and close. Now when I go back to my properties, if I click on the White House here and I choose an example contact, I'm going to choose Chris Merrier. Now it's linked. You can see it's a blue hyperlink. I have Chris chosen as my sample contact. When I click on Chris, I'm now looking at Chris's record, and you'll see that my custom module came here into my left side. It's under the related list. I'm in contacts, but I can now see all of Chris Merrier's associated properties. They'd all be listed here. If I were to make multiple custom module properties, they would all appear in the list if I then associated them with a variety of contacts. The way that I designed this one is called a one-to-many relationship because I put the lookup field in the properties module. What that means, since it's one-to-many, it's basically one contact could have many properties associated with it, but each property can only have one contact. There are different ways you might structure how you create your custom modules based on if you need a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many, or a many-to-many. I know some of you out there, it might have been a year or three since your last database management course, but certainly reach out to us for some help if you want some help in thinking about what kind of structure you'd want in those cases. Couple more tricks I'll just leave you before we wrap up here. If I go back into the customization of the custom modules, pull properties back up, and look at my layout, you can actually customize how this record appears in other lists. So like when I'm looking at the detail view, you can customize what the business card will look like, whether or not you're going to have some of these related lists associated. I don't need emails associated with my properties and so on. But if I go back under the contacts module and I look at the detailed views, I can see all of the related modules that contacts are associated with. And if I say, I want everybody to see properties moved up a little higher, and you can actually customize what the layouts are going to be here. If I could put the address on there, property name, and I'm going to put the address information in here. And I'm going to put it in this specific order. What I'm changing here is the view on the contacts record. When you're looking at a contact, how do your properties appear in your custom module? It's very good to remember to sort that out so that in the future, when you come back and you look at Chris Marrier's record, you can choose exactly where on the page does properties appear and what are the columns that users will see. Each user is free to reorganize the related list here in the order that they choose. It won't affect anyone else. And each user is free to customize the columns that they see on a related custom module. But it is nice to set this up for them, especially if you're managing a layout for many users, to kind of give everybody a good starting point. I'm going to stop the recording and open it up to questions here. Thank you for coming to the talk today about custom modules. I hope you learned something. And I want to hear your ideas about what kinds of things you think might be appropriate to make custom modules in your CRM. Thank you.